So it's a beautiful day, spring has arrived, and so we're outside the Lords, doing Inside the Lords this week. Despite the lovely weather, and actually it's taken me ages to get here because to a large extent London's got back to normal and we can barely remember that it's post-COVID times. Obviously lurking in the background is the Ukraine war, and it's not really a background. So I do think that from now on in, we have to remember that there is a war happening at the heart of Europe, and everything that I say is kind of slightly coloured by that because it's a very serious challenge to us all to think about how we understand it. Inside the Lords this week, there's been a range of questions on the Ukraine issue, constantly comes up. I've not managed to get in to speak on any of them because there's a great swathe of people wanting to get in, and the main thing I wanted to say was it really irritates me that it always becomes a sort of Labour, Lib Dem versus Tories ding dong. And it's not that I don't want to hold the government to account, but it feels so petty and so parochial to just simply see this war as another excuse to have a go at the Tories. It drives me mad. More generally in the Lords this week, to explain a little bit about process, we were at the end of the health and care bill, which I have not been following or been involved in, but there was a number of things that happened. Michael Forsyth, Lord Forsyth, put forward an amendment, which I mentioned last week, on assisted dying. And the problem with this amendment was, it was an amendment which would, if it had passed, forced the government to put before Parliament a bill on assisted dying. And he argued for it on the basis of the need for debate, because they can't get a debate. And the irony was that he also argued that this was a popular thing that the public wanted, and he was only doing what the public were demanding. I responded with many other people, and it wasn't really a debate about whether you're for or against assisted dying, but whether you should use a bill that's about health and care to actually introduce an amendment which would change the course of a democratically elected government's set of priorities, which obviously was outrageous to a certain extent. But in terms of the debate, it felt as though everyone in the room was on Michael Forsyth's side, to be honest, although there were some very good speeches from our side. I pointed out to Michael Forsyth that at least he understood what it felt like to be a member of the public now, because the public are constantly frustrated that they want to change the law and they don't have a mechanism for doing it, and that maybe he needed to organise a demonstration, or he could even lobby the government as he's very close to them. But anyway, when the vote went through significantly, Michael Forsyth was defeated, and I have to say that they looked shocked. But I think that was an attempt at abusing the parliamentary system and abusing the House of Lords to do that. Later on, there was another debate which was also accused of being an attempt at abusing the parliamentary system, in which I actually supported the amendment. And this was about at-home abortions, or as it was described. But really, it's telemedicine that allows you to take the first pill of an early termination at your home rather than having to go into a clinic. And that was introduced during lockdown for obvious reasons, because the NHS were basically not wanting people to go into hospitals when they didn't need to. There's no reason at all why you need to do that. And so in some ways it was just a very practical thing. And then I think a couple of weeks ago, the government just announced they were getting rid of it. Now, and they were going to go back to normal. Now, the thing about this was, very importantly, this was one of those things that happened in lockdown where a medical procedure was done more efficiently through lockdown. We realised that. It's a bit like working out that Zoom works and you can have sometimes meetings on Zoom. It doesn't mean I'm advocating we all go on Zoom all the time, but it's a practical thing. And the government getting rid of it was just nonsensical. So there was an amendment put in by Baroness Suggs that actually we should resume that practice. And I spoke in support of her. Now, I know that abortion's a very, hot topic. I mean, certainly morally charged. And there was a free vote, largely. People could vote which way they wanted. But the argument that we were putting forward, and I was supporting, was that this was not a change in the law. So it wasn't an abuse of Parliament. There was no law is going to change, right? It's exactly the same basis on which you would be given the tablets to take. It was just where you were doing them. And the original law about where you took or you had an abortion was all to do with backstreet abortion. So it's out of date, but it's no law change. So I voted for that, spoke on it. And that won as well, to the surprise of the government, I have to say, and what was quite a large anti-abortion lobby that were very upset about it. So I was on the winning side on a couple of debates this week, unusually. Later on, there was an amendment on single-sex wards in hospitals, and I just want to report on that because I think that was an appropriate amendment in a health and care bill, although in fact it wasn't taken to the vote by Baroness Emma Nicholson. But the thing that was astounding about that was that, apart from the fact that the debate was at about 2 a.m, as I recall, I mean, we were there till very, very late. There was actually a large turnout of a number of noble lords who openly said that they were Stonewall supporters and argued against the amendment, implying and inferring that anyone who was supporting it was a bigot. And I know that we're all familiar with this stuff, but I think it shows a very important thing that you can do in the Lords, which was that debate has actually got, and the previous discussions has got, a fair amount of media coverage. And Emma Nicholson revealed that one woman was raped in one of the wards, and the NHS had said she couldn't have been raped because it was a women-only ward, but it was a trans woman, i.e. a physical male. And in today's newspapers, that story has now been exposed, and the NHS have basically not denied it anymore. So, the kind of gaslighting that was happening of saying that was made up. And my point in that was just simply that I read all this stuff in the newspaper and it needed to be firmly in the public arena. And I suppose the Lords can be useful at getting those things a bit of sunlight, and therefore you can discuss them. I almost had another win this week, which is the government, and I read this in the papers rather than anywhere else, but the papers are full of the fact that Michael Gove, in his new role, has decided that the completely spurious and unneeded business, what they call building safety manager, which would have cost leaseholders a fortune if it was added, completely over-the-top, risk-averse measure that was introduced as a layer of bureaucracy in the panic about how you have building safety post-Grenfell, they look like they're going to drop that. The reason why that's significant is there was an amendment on getting rid of the building safety manager, and the amendment was by me, on my own, my first amendment, and so I'm quite pleased, and leaseholders are quite pleased. And I know that in the context of war raging around Europe, this is a minor point, but I actually genuinely thought that was worth doing. I don't think it was undemocratic, even though it was in the Lords, because actually what people expect of the building safety legislation that is being discussed at the moment is that buildings will be adequately safe. The layers and layers and layers of risk-averse precautionary principle nonsense that they've added in are not going to help leaseholders, even though they proclaim they will, and getting rid of some of those ridiculous additions is very important. So I'm very pleased. The leaseholders that I've been talking to are coming to see me for a cup of tea in the Lords next week, and I've got a meeting with the Minister, my first meeting with the Minister, where we can discuss what happens next. We're at that point in the proceedings in the House of Lords where everything is a panic, and the government, because they need to get things done, as I explained last week before the Queen's speech, means that they are pushing through everything really, really fast. So we've got ridiculous, absolutely frenzied attempts at starting it earlier, don't mind that, going on till late at night. They're bringing back the police and crime bill with all those controversial measures in relation to protests and so on, but lots more controversial. And they're trying to fit it in a morning that you have this debate about the reasons from the Commons, as it's called, where the Lords discusses it. And usually that would go on for a couple of days. Now going to be trying to cram it in. So the next few weeks are going to be frenetic and busy, to say the least. But I don't think good legislation is made in that way, no matter what way you look at it. The other thing that's happened is that they've just released the online harms bill. You might think, well, I know that's around, but what's happened is it's had pre-legislative scrutiny, it's been through endless committees, lots of lobbying's gone on, consultations. Everybody thought it would be an improved bill once it was actually finalised. It's now returned, and it's managed to keep nobody happy. I mean, the people who want greater clampdown say it's not hard enough. Priti Patel in her wisdom says, don't worry everybody, I know that we have still got this censorship of lawful but harmful, but we're not going to be vague, I'm going to list the harms. which is frightening to think of Priti Patel listing harms. And the examples she gave were harms such as bullying, harassment. Let me tell you, that is a censor's charter there. And that relates to the final thing I'll say, which is the people who will end up with a huge amount of power if that bill goes through, which it will, presumably after the Queen's speech, will be Ofcom. And Ofcom have just announced today that they've withdrawn the licence for Russia Today, for RT. I don't care whether you like Russia Today, I don't care whether you think that it's propaganda from Russia, whatever it is. It was a channel that lots of people watch. And they don't watch it because they're pro-Putin. They watch it like they watch Al Jazeera, or they watch any number of things because you go and look around, right? And it's interesting to see different perspectives. And the fact that the government didn't have the courage to ban it themselves, but used the regulator to withdraw the Ofcom licence, is very dangerous. If you think that you're trying to set up an alternative media channel, I mean, there are a lot of things that are kind of like always looking to Ofcom. Ofcom just have basically censored a TV channel. And why we would emulate Putin by basically censoring the media to deal with a war seems to me to be a great betrayal of Western freedom. And similarly with those academics who may be arguing, you know, anti-Ukraine, everybody's obsessed with neo-Nazis in the Ukraine and trying to make excuses for Russia invading, full-scale invasion of the sovereignty of the Ukraine. But nonetheless, those academics should not be censored. So when you get the minister in charge of universities saying, I'm going to investigate these academics, that's sinister, and we should absolutely oppose it. And in that line, to finish off, there are alternative media publishing going on that you should get involved in, and that does not mean going down the rabbit hole of watching conspiratorial nonsense, which is what tends to have happened when people reject the mainstream media. So I don't advocate that, but I do advocate that you read our latest batch of Letters on Liberty. We had a debate on Ukraine at the start of the week as the Academy of Ideas. Wow, that was pretty hardcore, very controversial. You should watch the live stream. Last night we were launching with the Free Speech Union the new book by Jakub Mashangama on free speech, a brilliant history of free speech which you should all buy and read. And also he has written one of the latest Letters on Liberty, which is the future of free speech, and it's a really great little pamphlet. We've also got Translation is Liberation by Vanessa Pufovich, which is one of my absolute favourites. And then Defending the Digital Self by Tracy follows all the points about digital ID, covered in such an interesting way by Tracy. So get yourself the latest batch of Letters on Liberty, have a cup of tea and sit down and read them, because the one thing that I am still convinced on, particularly when the first casualty of war is truth, is that what we need to do is not get cynical about what we read, but to actually read more, think about ideas, and at least I hope the Academy of Ideas through Letters on Liberty provides you with some real ways of understanding how we can fight for freedom, because you can't just fight for freedom by being cynical and dismissing everything the mainstream media says. You have to have some ideas yourself, so I hope these contribute to that. See you next week.